Produce a text-to-speech clip that sounds like a thoughtful interview response. Use a warm, "Have you ever driven to a place filled with childhood memories, only to find strangers packing it into moving trucks?" That's exactly what happened to me. I thought I was going to sign the papers that would finally transfer my grandfather's inheritance into my name. Instead, I watched complete strangers carry his furniture out of the house. When I demanded an explanation, my father looked me straight in the eye and said, "We already sold it." My mother didn't even look guilty. She simply shrugged. "You're young. You don't need an inheritance." I thought that was the worst thing they could possibly do. I was wrong, because hidden inside my grandfather's workshop was one envelope. And inside that envelope was the only document that could destroy everything they had planned. My name is Noah Carter. I'm 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed my parents would never betray me. We weren't a perfect family. We argued, we disagreed, but I never imagined they'd steal from me, especially not from the one man who had loved me like a son, my grandfather. William Carter. Everyone called him Bill. To me, he was simply Grandpa. Grandpa lived on a beautiful 70-acre farm just outside a small town in Montana. It wasn't a luxury estate. There was no mansion, no private lake, no expensive cars, just rolling green fields. An old red barn, a white farmhouse that creaked whenever the wind blew, apple trees Grandpa planted 50 years earlier, a wooden porch where we'd sit every evening watching sunsets. That farm wasn't valuable because of the land. It was valuable because of the memories. Every summer of my childhood was spent there. While other kids played video games, Grandpa taught me how to repair fences, drive a tractor, catch fish, plant vegetables, fix engines. He always said, "A man isn't measured by what he owns. He's measured by what he protects." Back then, I thought he was talking about property. Years later, I'd realize he was talking about people my parents rarely visited. Dad always claimed he was too busy. Mom said the farm was boring. Sometimes entire months passed without them calling Grandpa. But every Friday after work, I drove 2 hours to spend the weekend helping him. We repaired old machinery, painted fences, fed horses, shared stories over coffee every morning. He never asked me to come. I simply wanted to. 3 years before he passed away, Grandpa's health began failing. His knees hurt constantly. Then came heart problems. Eventually, he couldn't manage the farm alone without anyone asking. I moved into the guest room, not permanently, just during the weeks when he needed help. I cooked meals, drove him to doctor appointments, handled the paperwork, paid bills online because Grandpa refused to learn computers. Some nights I'd sleep in a chair beside his hospital bed, not because anyone expected me to, because he was family. Dad visited exactly 4 times that entire year. Each visit lasted less than an hour. Every conversation sounded the same. "Dad, you should sell the place. It's too much work." Grandpa always smiled politely. "I'm not ready." The conversation would end there, at least. That's what I thought. One rainy afternoon, about 8 months before Grandpa died, we were sitting in the workshop sharpening old tools. Without looking up, Grandpa suddenly asked, "Noah, if something ever happens to me, what would you do with this place?" I laughed. "Keep it exactly like this." He smiled. "Really?" "I'd fix the roof, repaint the barn, plant more apple trees, and make sure kids could grow up here the way I did." Grandpa nodded slowly. "I hoped you'd say that." At the time, I didn't understand why he asked. 6 months later, The hospital called massive heart attack. By the time I arrived, he was awake. Barely. His hands were weak. His breathing was slow. He motioned for me to come closer. I leaned beside him. He whispered, "Promise me." "I promise." He smiled. "No matter what happens, protect the farm." I squeezed his hand. "I will." Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. The funeral was held 4 days later. Nearly 200 people attended. Neighbors, old friends, former employees, people whose lives Grandpa had quietly changed. Everyone shared stories. How he'd repaired tractors for free, paid school tuition for struggling families, delivered food during harsh winters. I had never realized how many lives he'd touched. Dad cried during the service. Mom cried too. At the time, I believed those tears were real. A week later, Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Benson, called me. "Mr. Carter, your grandfather's estate process has begun. I'll need you at the office next Friday. Is everything okay?" "Yes. There's simply paperwork that requires your signature." I assumed it was routine. Nothing more. Friday morning, I drove toward the lawyer's office. Halfway there, my phone rang. It was my cousin Tyler. His voice sounded panicked. "Noah, where are you?" "Driving to town. You need to come to the farm. Right now." "Why?" "They're moving everything." My stomach dropped. "Who?" "The new owners." I slammed on the brakes. "What new owners?" "They said they bought the property yesterday." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Bought? That wasn't possible. Grandpa's estate wasn't even settled. I turned the truck around and drove faster than I ever had. When I reached the farm, 2 moving trucks were parked outside. Workers carried Grandpa's furniture onto trailers. His rocking chair, his antique clock, his toolbox. Everything. A large sold sign stood beside the driveway. I jumped out of my truck. "What is going on?" One of the movers looked confused. "We're just doing our job." "The property's been sold." "No, it hasn't." Before he could answer, the front door opened. Dad walked outside, holding a folder. Behind him, Mom smiled as if nothing unusual was happening. I stared at them. "What did you do?" Dad answered without emotion. "We sold it." "You what?" Mom crossed her arms. "You weren't using it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It wasn't yours to sell." Dad stepped closer. "I'm your father. I made the decision." I shook my head. "You had no right." Mom looked at me as if I were being childish. "You're young. You don't need an inheritance. You can earn your own money." I felt something inside me break. This wasn't about money. It was Grandpa's home. Dad shrugged. Now it's someone else's. At that exact moment, Mr. Benson's black sedan pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, holding several legal folders. The moment he saw the Soldi sign, his face turned pale. "What? Have you done?" Dad confidently replied. "We finalized the sale yesterday." Mr. Benson slowly removed his glasses. That sale should have been impossible. Everyone froze. Dad frowned. "What do you mean?" The lawyer looked toward the farmhouse, then back at my father. Finally he said, "Because, according to William Carter's estate, you never had the legal authority to sell this property." Before anyone could respond, my eyes caught something inside Grandpa's old workshop. Hidden beneath the workbench was a small rusted metal box. It hadn't been there before. Across the lid, written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting, were 8 words that made my heart stop. "For Noah, if they ever betray you." Conversational voice with natural pacing, clear pronunciation, and slight pauses for reflection. Add subtle emphasis on important points and soft breaths to maintain realism. Ideal interview clips, 20-30 seconds. For several seconds, nobody moved. The wind rustled through the old oak trees surrounding Grandpa's workshop as I stared at the rusted metal box. Across the lid, written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting, were the words that made my heart pound. For Noah, if they ever betray you. It felt impossible, almost as if Grandpa had known this day would come. Behind me, I could still hear movers carrying furniture out of the farmhouse. Dad was arguing with Mr. Benson. Mom kept insisting they had done nothing wrong. None of it mattered. Right now, all I cared about was the box. I quickly slipped inside the workshop. It smelled exactly the way I remembered. Fresh-cut pine-nut engine oil, old leather gloves. The wooden workbench where Grandpa had taught me how to sharpen chisels was still covered with his tools. Everything looked untouched. Except the small metal box. I picked it up carefully. It was surprisingly heavy. There was no lock, just an old brass latch. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were three things: a handwritten letter, a small brass key, and an old black-and-white photograph. The photograph showed Grandpa standing beside another man in front of the farmhouse nearly 40 years earlier. Written on the back were the words, "Never trust a handshake when the law requires a signature." I frowned. What did that mean? I unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed with age. Grandpa's handwriting was neat and steady. "My dear Noah, if you're reading this." Then someone ignored my final wishes. I prayed it would never happen. But I know my son. And I know what greed can do. My throat tightened. Grandpa continued, "If Michael has sold this farm without your knowledge, then he has done something he legally could never do." I looked toward the workshop window. Dad was still standing outside, completely unaware of what I was reading. The next sentence made my heart race. The property was never fully mine to give away alone. Many years ago, your grandmother and I created documents that protected this farm. One copy remained with my attorney. Another stayed hidden. The final paper was placed where only you would think to look. I read the line again. The final paper. There was another document? One important enough for Grandpa to hide? I turned the page. Attached beneath the letter was the small brass key with a note. Storage Unit 214 Carter County. Storage? I had completely forgotten about that place. Years ago, Grandpa rented a small storage locker after the barn roof collapsed. Most people assumed he'd emptied it. Apparently, he hadn't. Outside, voices grew louder. Dad had noticed I wasn't nearby. "Noah, where are you?" I quickly folded the letter and slipped everything into my backpack. Just as I closed the box, Dad walked into the workshop. "There you are." His eyes immediately noticed the backpack. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing." He stepped closer. "If it's from my father, it belongs to the family." I looked directly at him. "No, it belongs to Grandpa. And he left it for me." Dad's expression hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." I calmly replied, "I know enough." For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not kindly, confidently. "As soon as the buyers finish today, you'll understand there's nothing you can do." He turned and walked away. He sounded certain. Too certain. A few minutes later, Mr. Benson approached me. He looked exhausted. I need to speak with you privately. We walked behind the old barn where no one else could hear us. He lowered his voice. Did your grandfather ever leave you anything? I hesitated. A letter. His eyes widened. What did it say? It mentioned another document. Mr. Benson closed his eyes. Thank God. You know about it? He nodded. Your grandfather told me years ago that if anything happened, one last paper would protect the property. So where is it? I don't know. He never told me. He only said, if Noah remembers our Saturdays together, he'll find it. Our Saturdays. I repeated those words in my head. Every Saturday with Grandpa had been different. Fishing, repairing tractors, planting trees, cleaning the attic, building birdhouses, driving into town. There were hundreds of memories. Which one mattered? Then I remembered the brass key. Storage Unit 214. Maybe the answer was there. I looked at Mr. Benson. I'm going to the storage facility. I'll come with you. 30 minutes later, we arrived at Carter County Storage. The place looked almost abandoned. Rows of faded orange storage units stretched across the property. The elderly manager looked up from his newspaper. Can I help you? I placed the brass key on the counter. His eyes immediately recognized it. I haven't seen that key in years. It belonged to William Carter. I know. I'm his grandson. The old man smiled sadly. Your grandfather was a good man. He picked up a logbook. Unit 214. No one's opened it in almost 12 years. He unlocked the security gate. You boys go ahead. The old metal door creaked as we rolled it open. Dust floated through the afternoon sunlight. Inside, everything had been carefully organized. Grandpa's old tool chest, several wooden crates, family photo albums, a rocking horse I'd played with as a child, and in the very back, a gray fireproof filing cabinet. My pulse quickened. This had to be it. I opened the cabinet. Inside were neatly labeled folders, property surveys, tax records, insurance farm equipment. Then I saw another folder, thicker than the others. Its label simply read, Do Not Destroy. Inside were dozens of legal papers, original land deeds, boundary maps, loan releases, and Grandpa's personal diary. Mr. Benson carefully examined the documents. His expression changed. This changes everything. What is it? He pointed toward one document. The buyers only purchased 60 acres. I frowned. What? He spread an old survey map across the cabinet. The original farm isn't 70 acres. It's 71. I stared at the map. What difference does 1 acre make? He slowly pointed toward a small square outlined in red. The farmhouse. It sits on that final acre. I blinked. So, he nodded. If this survey is still legally valid, your parents sold land they believed included the house. But according to these records, they never sold the farmhouse at all. For the first time that day, hope returned. Maybe Grandpa had planned this all along. But before we could celebrate, Mr. Benson pulled one final envelope from the bottom drawer. Across the front, in Grandpa's handwriting, were 6 chilling words. The last paper isn't here. I looked at him in confusion. If it's not here, where is it? Mr. Benson slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. It read, The Mud CD person holding the last paper has never been part of this family, but they have protected it for 25 years. I felt my heart pounding again. Someone else had it. Someone Grandpa trusted more than his own son. And somehow, We had to find them before my parents discovered the truth. For several seconds, neither Mr. Benson nor I spoke. I kept staring at Grandpa's handwritten note. The person holding the last paper has never been part of this family. But they have protected it for 25 years. I read it again. If it wasn't Grandma, if it wasn't the lawyer, then who? Grandpa trusted someone outside the family with the most important document of his life. There had to be a reason. Mr. Benson folded the note carefully. I think I know who he meant. I looked up immediately. You do? He nodded slowly. There was only one person your grandfather trusted as much as family. Who? He smiled. Samuel Harper. The name sounded familiar. Then, suddenly, I remembered Mr. Harper, the elderly man who owned the hardware store in town. Every Saturday, Grandpa and I stopped there for nails, paint, or tractor parts. I hadn't seen him in years. He and your grandfather were best friends for over 50 years, Mr. Benson said. If Bill trusted anyone with that paper, it would have been Sam. We drove straight into town. Harper Hardware looked exactly the way it always had. The old wooden sign still hung above the entrance. The bell above. The door jingled as we walked inside. An elderly man looked up from behind the counter. White hair, suspenders, reading glasses hanging from his shirt. Pocket. He smiled politely. Can I help you, gentlemen? Before I could answer, his eyes landed on me. For a moment, he simply stared. Then he whispered, Noah? I smiled. It's been a long time. He walked around the counter and hugged me tightly. You look just like your grandfather. That sentence nearly broke me. After a few minutes of catching up, Mr. Benson quietly placed Grandpa's handwritten note on the counter. Sam's smile faded. He read it once, then closed his eyes. So, it finally happened. You knew? He nodded. I prayed this day would never come. Without saying another word, he walked toward the back office. A few moments later, Han returned carrying an old oak box. It was covered in dust. He placed it gently on the counter. Bill gave me this 25 years ago. He told me, never give this to anyone unless Noah asks for it. Himself. My heart started racing. This is it? Sam nodded. I've never opened it. The key has always belonged to your grandfather. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a tiny brass key, and handed it to me. My hands shook as I unlocked the box. Inside, there was only one envelope, thick but cream-colored. Across the front, Grandpa had written the final paper. I slowly opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first, a notarized amendment to Grandpa's trust. The second, a certified land survey. The third, letter addressed to the probate court. Mr. Benson quickly read the Aitue amendment. His eyes grew wider with every page. Finally, he looked at me. Noah, your parents never owned this property. What? They couldn't have sold it. Legally, they never had the authority. He spread the documents across the counter. Look here, he pointed to a paragraph. Years earlier, Grandpa had transferred ownership of the farmhouse and one surrounding acre into a protected family trust. The trust named exactly one future beneficiary. Noah Carter. The transfer would become effective immediately upon Grandpa's death. No approval from my parents. No probate delay. No additional signatures. Everything had already been completed. Years ago, I couldn't believe it. So, the sale? Mr. Benson smiled. The buyers purchased land, but They never legally purchased the farmhouse or the trust property. They bought something your parents didn't own. At that exact moment, my phone rang. Unknown number. Answered. Hello? A calm female voice spoke. Mr. Carter? Yes, this is Jennifer Lewis. I'm the attorney representing the people who purchased your grandfather's farm. My stomach tightened. Okay, we've just discovered a serious problem. What kind of problem? There appears to be a title defect. I looked at Mr. Benson. He quietly nodded. Jennifer continued. Your parents signed documents claiming they had authority to sell the entire property. But county records don't match the deed. I took a deep breath. I think I know why. The buyers requested an emergency meeting that afternoon. By 3 o'clock, everyone was gathered inside the county title office. My parents arrived looking completely confident. Dad smiled when he saw me. You finally ready to accept reality? I didn't answer. Instead, Mr. Benson placed Grandpa's trust amendment on the conference table. The title examiner adjusted her glasses, read silently for nearly 5 minutes, then looked directly at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, did either of you know this trust existed? Dad frowned. What trust? She slowly turned the document toward him. His face immediately lost all color. Mom grabbed the papers. She scanned the first page, then the second. Her hands began trembling. This can't be real. The examiner calmly replied, It has been recorded with the county for 25 years. Dad looked stunned. I've never seen this before. Mr. Benson answered, quietly, because your father never wanted you to. The buyer's attorney folded her arms. If these documents are authentic. My clients have purchased property from people who didn't legally own all of it. Silence filled the room. Dad looked at me, then at the papers, then back at me. For the first time, he looked afraid. Real fear. The title examiner finally spoke. This matter will have to be decided in court. She closed the file. Until then, no additional transfers can take place. The sale was officially frozen. The buyers looked frustrated. My parents looked panicked, and for the first time since Grandpa died, hope finally felt real as everyone prepared to leave. Sam quietly walked over to me. I almost forgot. He reached into his coat pocket. There was one more thing. Bill wanted you to have. He handed me an old VHS tape across the label. Grandpa had written, "Play this only if my son challenges my wishes." I stared at the tape. One final message. One final piece of evidence. If Grandpa had recorded the truth, then the courtroom was about to hear it. And my parents had absolutely no idea what was coming. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, the buyers, reporters from the local newspaper, even people who had known my grandfather for decades had come to watch. Word had spread quickly through our small Montana county. Everyone wanted to know one thing. Had William Carter's own son really tried to sell property that wasn't his? I sat beside Mr. Benson at the plaintiff's table. Across the room, my parents sat with their attorney. For the first time in my life, my father didn't look confident. He looked exhausted. The judge entered. Good morning. Everyone stood. After a few formalities, the hearing began. The buyer's attorney spoke first. Your Honor, my clients purchased 70 acres from Michael and Linda Carter in good faith. They paid the agreed purchase price. They had no knowledge of any ownership dispute. The judge nodded. Understood. Then he turned toward Mr. Benson. Your response? Mr. Benson stood. Your Honor, this case isn't about the buyers. They acted honestly. This case is about whether the defendants had legal authority to sell property they did not own. He placed Grandpa's trust documents on the evidence table. We intend to prove they did not. The county title examiner testified first. She explained every document, every survey, every recorded amendment, every legal filing. Then she pointed toward the official county records displayed on a screen. 25 years ago, William Carter transferred ownership of the farmhouse and one surrounding acre into a protected family trust. She clicked to the next page. The sole beneficiary named in that trust is Noah Carter. The courtroom became silent. The judge adjusted his glasses. So this transfer was legally recorded decades before Mr. Carter's death? Yes, Your Honor. And therefore, the defendants never possessed legal ownership of that portion of the property. Correct. My father's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, my clients were unaware this trust existed. The judge looked directly at him. Irrelevant. Good faith may explain their actions. It does not create ownership. Dad slowly lowered his head. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand. After taking the oath, Mr. Benson asked quietly, Noah, why was this property important to you? I smiled sadly. Because it wasn't just land. It was my grandfather. It was every fishing trip, every summer, every lesson he ever taught me. I promised him I'd protect it. Mr. Benson nodded. And did you ever authorize your parents to sell it? No. Were you informed before the sale? No. When did you first learn? When I arrived and saw strangers loading Grandpa's furniture into moving trucks. Several jurors quietly shook their heads. Then the defense attorney cross-examined me. Mr. Carter, isn't it true your parents believed they had authority? I don't know what they believed. I only know what the documents say. And you benefited financially from these documents. I answered calmly, no. I benefited from my grandfather keeping his promise. The judge looked toward Mr. Benson. Do you have additional evidence? Mr. Benson smiled. Yes, Your Honor. He placed an old VHS cassette on the evidence table. I believe this is the final piece. The courtroom projector was prepared. A technician inserted the tape. Static filled the screen. Then, Grandpa appeared. He was sitting on the farmhouse porch, wearing his favorite denim jacket. He smiled into the camera. If you're watching this, I guess I'm gone. A few people quietly wiped away tears. Grandpa continued. Hello, Judge. Hello, Noah. And hello, Michael. My father froze. Grandpa looked directly into the camera. I recorded this because I know my son. I love him. But loving someone doesn't mean pretending they never make mistakes. The courtroom remained perfectly silent. Grandpa continued. Years ago, my son asked me to sell the farm. I refused. He asked again. I refused again. So I made a decision. I placed the farmhouse into a protected trust. Not because I wanted to punish Michael, but because I wanted to protect Noah. I felt my throat tighten. Grandpa smiled gently. Noah never asked me for this farm. He earned it. He repaired every fence. He drove me to every doctor's appointment. He stayed when everyone else was too busy. If anyone deserves this home, it's him. Then Grandpa looked directly into the camera one final time. If anyone tells you I changed my mind, they're lying. The tape ended. Silence filled the courtroom. Even the defense attorney said nothing. The judge removed his glasses. He looked at my parents. Do either of you dispute this recording? Dad slowly stood. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Finally, his voice cracked. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. I appreciate your honesty. After a brief recess, the judge returned with his ruling. The trust documents are valid. The recorded amendment is valid. The videotaped testimony supports the written evidence. The defendants did not possess legal authority to sell the farmhouse or the protected trust property. He looked toward the buyers. The purchase agreement is partially rescinded. The trust property immediately transfers to Noah Carter. He then turned toward my parents. The defendants are responsible for reimbursing the buyers for the portion of the sale they could not legally convey, along with applicable legal costs. The gavel struck. This matter is concluded. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded everyone. I quietly slipped away. I wasn't interested in interviews. I drove straight to the farmhouse. The moving trucks were gone. The furniture had been returned. The old porch swing still creaked in the afternoon breeze. Everything looked exactly as Grandpa had left it. For the first time since his funeral, it truly felt like home again. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Dad. He looked older than he had just a few weeks earlier. He stood silently beside the porch. I was angry at him. I know. I thought he trusted you more than me. I looked at him. He did. Dad nodded sadly. I guess I earned that. There was no excuse. No argument. No blame. Just regret. I'm sorry, Noah. The words were quiet, but they were real. I took a deep breath. I forgive you. His eyes filled with tears. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. He nodded. I understand. For the first time in years, we spoke honestly, not as enemies, not even as friends, simply as a father and son trying to rebuild something that had almost been lost forever. Over the next year, I restored the farmhouse, repaired the old barn, replanted Grandpa's apple orchard. Every spring, neighborhood children came to learn gardening. Every summer, veterans gathered there for community barbecues. Every autumn, families picked apples together. The house Grandpa protected became exactly what he had always wanted, a place where people felt welcome. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, I sat alone on the porch swing. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice. A man isn't measured by what he owns. He's measured by what he protects. I finally understood. He hadn't asked me to protect the farm. He had asked me to protect his values, his honesty, his kindness, his legacy. The farm was simply where those memories lived. And as long as I kept them alive, Grandpa would never really be gone. The end.